He was captain of the football team, captain of the baseball team. He had hoped to be a professional sports player, but unfortunately he had an injury when he was in the Navy. So when he came home from the Korean War, the family said, well, Lefty, you've got a choice. You can either be a cop, a fireman, or a garbage man. He said, I'm not hauling garbage and I'm not running into burning buildings, so I guess I'll be a cop. Starting out was a little bit of a rough start, but he stuck to it and eventually became a really vested member of the West New York Police Department.
Chief Oriente was somebody that, had high remarks from his peers and, was looked at as like a patriot, as a hero in the community. He was somebody that was clearly politically connected and politically savvy, and I think that's what helped him move through the ranks the way that he did.
He got a reputation on the street of being somebody that you could go to when you had a problem that maybe you wouldn't necessarily go to a police officer for. People just naturally looked to him. He was a leader, and he was the last chief that West New York ever had.
In 1994, I get the call that I'm going to be hired. I was nervous, but it was a great opportunity. And within 2 weeks, I got the notice, you're going to the academy. I was in exceptional physical condition. I was ready for this. Made sure I kept my academics above a 94 percentile. I hadn't picked up a gun in my life, but I learned real quick how to shoot, and I got the highest honors out of over 50 people for shooting in my class. My mother was extremely proud of my brother. She was fearful, but she was extremely supportive. One of my first assignments, I'm a patrolman walking the street. Being in uniform on patrol, our thing was just to hump from job to job to job, respond to people's needs, fill out a report, and that's a done deal. Very harmonious. Everybody looked out for each other. There's no one going after each other. There's no jealousies. There was no animosities. You're cohesive. You do everything together. One for all for one. But you're also now being indoctrinated to the blue wall of silence, because what happens is you're covering for that guy. 20 years old, this is what I'm learning. There's no more individuality. You're all a team.
The blue wall of silence is the universal unspoken code among police officers. Don't report your fellow officers, their errors, misconduct, or even their crimes.
And there's another lesson I learned in law enforcement. Some people really don't deserve to wear a badge. So I'm walking the beat in the upper third part of town late at night, and I hear one of the guys I work with very frequently over the radio, and he's screaming, 3-2, shots fired. So I gotta try and get down to his zone. So I start running. I run from 62nd and Adams to 62nd and Jackson. And there's a car at the red light. I decide I'm gonna commandeer the car. So I reach for the door, and the guy rolls down the window. It's Carmine Gator, the detective that we work with, and he's off duty. And now I'm happy because there's another cop. I said, Carmine, we got shots fired. This guy's on the radio. He's in trouble. And Carmine looks over to me and he goes, I'm with my wife, and I'm taking her home. And I was shocked because Carmine was only worried about Carmine. I wanted to lay into this piece of shit. You don't leave another man. 2 weeks later, I'm going to the grocery store. I see Carmine. So Carmine's down in my neck of the woods, and he's coming out of a very nondescript storefront. And he's way on the other side of town from where he's supposed to be working. I look around, I don't see any police cars, and there's nothing to buy in this store. So I look at it as being weird. But I know where he is. He is at the epicenter of the entire universe of all things bad happening in the street. This is where all the crimes are taking place, people gambling illegally, and stuff like that. So I'm just watching him come out of this storefront. And he walks out, and he looks both ways, and he's got this paper bag in his hand. And it just struck me, you know, because I'm adding 2 and 2 and I'm getting 10 in my head, and I don't know what he's doing here. I know what that place is, but I got no proof. And I say to myself, that envelope was probably cash. This is potentially a dirty cop.
There was this renaissance of young Hollywood people.
Like everyone was sneezing fame all over each other.
From the network that brought you Dark Side of the Ring and Dark Side of Football, now it's time to unravel the 90s. The era that brought us grunge, reinvented hip-hop, and gave birth to the internet.
We're all doing what we're supposed to do, and this is how it ends.
Dark Side of the 90s. New episode, Thursday, on Vice.
In 1994, beat cop Rich Rivera started to suspect that one of his superiors in the West New York Police Department was on the take. But he would soon learn that for the West New York PD, accepting kickbacks was nothing new.
My dad joined the force in 1956. There was an instance where they had gone out on a raid and they discovered a cash box. And so they were like, yeah, rookie, go out in the hallway, just, watch the door. And a few minutes later, the commanding officer came out with a folded $20 bill and popped it in my dad's pocket and said, tell your wife we said Merry Christmas. Now, that seems pretty innocuous when you say it, but in that moment, he knew if he didn't take the $20 bill, he was going to be an outsider. And so he took it. And that's what started it all.
Some 40 years after Oriente joined the West New York PD, another rookie on the force was about to be indoctrinated into the same culture. After witnessing fellow detective Carmine Gaeta concealing what looked like a bag of dirty money, Officer Rich Rivera did what cops are paid to do. He started investigating.
I'm thinking to myself, this is potentially a dirty cop. I'm going to see if I get to the bottom of this. So now I start doing my own research. I spend a little more time down there on Hudson Avenue, seeing what's going on. I see Carmine coming out of storefronts, same places. So I start going to some of these bodegas, and I'm looking around for myself. I'm just poking around. I'm buying a soda. I'm buying a bag of chips. And you hear the machines. They're all playing in the background. They have a very distinct tone to them. These were the Joker poker machines. Joker poker are electronic video games, and you get credit, just like you could build credit up on any other video game. You build up a certain number of credits, and now you're going to get cashed out. Now you have gambling. You're pretty much running a casino in a little bodega on Hudson Avenue.
West New York was a hotbed for illegal gambling, and in the back room of every one of these bodegas or convenience stores were these illegal gambling machines, Joker Poker, primarily. There was a criminal organization run by Jose Grana and his son, Jose Grana Jr., and the Grana family had the monopoly on all these machines.
The Grana family ran a shady operation that was
interview for you. Are you buckled up? You gotta buckle up. Michael A. Wood Jr., former Marine, and in this particular case, more relevantly, former Baltimore Police Department officer, and a guy who's been speaking out about the culture of policing in this country and has some really interesting things to say. So you started tweeting about your time as a Baltimore police officer, and you said some pretty interesting things.
The only person that was surprised by what I said was everybody that doesn't live in the hood. Mm-hmm. Everybody that lives in the hood just went, oh, look, a cop admitted it. But everyone else said, oh my gosh, that really happens? Of course it happens. Did you think the black community was lying for the last 100 years? Is that what we really thought? So it's not that there's a racist cop. It's not that there's like this mass organization, like we have this conspiracy. It's that you go into this culture that has these racist roots that you don't think about. It's just what policing has become. And so you do it. A suspect gets kicked in the face. Somebody makes up a little bit on a PC statement. All this stuff is just what police do. So when you were a good guy joining the good guys, you thought that that's what good guys do. Like, you tear the house apart. You break things. You do things like that because those are thems. You don't care what you do to them. They're somebody else. They're the enemy. So if it was in Afghanistan and you were throwing things around, you just wouldn't care because they're the enemy. So it's the same thing. It's just callousness. Finally got my transfer to the Northern District. And when I got to the Northern District, I went to this place called Mount Washington, if you've been there. Mm-hmm. And that was like, where am I? This is Baltimore. Like, I'm driving down Cross Country Boulevard, and there's a stream next to me. I'm like, wow, there's like citizens out mowing the lawn, and so I'm like, well, these are the same people as me. I'm not gonna mess with these people. So I had to get stats. You have to get your arrest. You have to get everything that you're going to bring back to show you did something. So I can't arrest the judge's son that's walking around there. I'm not going to jack him up and search him, right? So I would go to the Park Heights and to the black neighborhood, and I would get my arrest there so that I can make my supervisors happy, because we all knew I wasn't going to arrest anybody in Mount Washington.
Part of the assumption that this is what you do. You go out and it's institutional racism to its core.
I guess the emotional and moral change happened when I would watch the drug dealers. So I would watch them, I would sit in covert, and I would hide in vans or in buildings. I would sit there for like 13, 14 hours a day because I had to get up before they opened, and I couldn't leave until they left. But when you're sitting there, you're watching everything he does, not just seeing him at his worst. So your whole time that you're a cop, you see everybody at their worst. And when I'm watching him sell drugs, he'll get up and sell drugs. And then like one time I saw him run back get all excited because a car was coming. And I'm thinking, oh, here's the re-up. This is going to be big. And he runs down and he gets his baby out of the car. And he kind of like before he did that, he told everybody else to go away. So he gets his baby out of the car and he takes him in the house and makes sure everything is good. And then he comes back out and it's like, fuck, it's just a normal person. He's doing this to make money, but he's not another. He's just one of us doing something different. But I was in their community, whether they knew it or not. It just felt wrong. I felt like I should go and like say hi, instead of running over and locking people up. It's weird. You may have even heard it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Common saying.
Yep.
So shoot first. Take no risk, because you can just, at least if you shoot somebody wrong, at least you're just go and be tried. Instead of having something happen to you. So you're immediately on the offensive.
But I didn't suspect to what degree the cops viewed themselves as an occupying force. I knew that they thought, hey, it's us versus them, but like I thought that they would think that, well, the other guy, I mean, obviously he's got kids, he's got a wife, he lives as a human being, like I live as a human being, that there would be some degree of empathy. You're saying that is just very few and far between?
Sure, in an aspect, I could be projecting. I could be just talking about myself. Maybe I lack complete empathy. But I didn't see anybody acting any different than I did. And the rules do say that you're supposed to have a continuum of force. You're supposed to escalate from pepper spray and baton and all that stuff. But that's not, nobody even knows how to use those things effectively. So when you're afraid, you go to the one you know will stop it.
Some people are worried about the militarization of police, but you said something interesting, which is that you actually think that they could use a little bit of military training. What do you mean by that?
So from the Marine Corps, I was taught to shoot proficiently. I'm not worried about using my weapon. I know if I need to use it, I will be able to use it effectively, and I will be able to do it better than the other guy is doing it. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have that fear. It was just that if this goes down, I know what to do. I've been trained for this. It's cool. No big deal. I'm not going to set my boundaries, but if he crosses this line, I'm going to give him a line. If he crosses that line, then I'm going to act. But it's going to be a decent line. Mm-hmm. And I have to say pretty much the same about everyone else that I served with that had served in combat arms. There's a thing where people say, you get locked up on a humble. So if you ask
I don't know that.
If you ask a dealer, or you ask somebody, 16 to 24-year-old black male in the ghetto, they've been locked up on a humble once before. And that means that they're being humbled. So they ran their mouth a little bit, so they got a disorderly, or they did something, so you're writing them a bull parking ticket, or moving violation, or something like that. So it's
just even a term for it. I didn't know that. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to humble you. By the way, if you humbled a kid in the suburbs and you put a criminal record on him, that'd be a huge deal.
I imagine that citation would be revoked before you handed it in. We really need to focus on that. That's just another human. And tear down these walls. We have flags, and we have, I'm Republican or I'm Democrat, or I have this and I have that, and nations, Confederate flags, American flags, and we take all these things and we build them up, and we let walls divide all of our society. We're all the same. We have to tear down these walls, and we have to start empathizing with other human beings. And for policy, we have to start policing with science. So, in Colorado and in Portugal, they lowered their juvenile usage of marijuana. How did they lower their juvenile usage of marijuana?
They decriminalized it.
So if you want to lower, then you legalize and you control. In Baltimore, we focus on who commits crimes in Baltimore. And who commits crimes in Baltimore? 16 to 24-year-old black males commit crimes in Baltimore. That's who you do car stops on. That's who you focus on. It makes sense to a level. And then you go, well, why are they the ones committing the crimes? So we're arresting them because they have a previous marijuana possession charge that we jacked them up on a corner for and took out of their pocket illegally. And now they're driving in their car, but they missed the court date, so they have a warrant out. So now we lock him up for a warrant, and he's now loses his job, and he gets his license suspended. And then he's driving, and we're pulling him over, and we're locking him up for that again. So that cycle, we did. We started that. We perpetrated. So that's completely illogical that even if you say to yourself, I'm focusing on the 16 to 24 black males because those guys are the ones that commit crimes. Yeah, but they're committing crimes because we push them into the cycle. If we want to stop them from committing crimes, we have to stop pushing them into a hopeless cycle.
Hello, this is Anton. You're listening to On Resistance Radio. We are a horizontal media collective from Los Angeles. Today, we are going to be discussing abolishing the police and what that looks like. Does anyone want to go ahead and get started?
My name's Esho. The first question that pops in my mind when talking about this is it possible to abolish police inside of a police state where every part of our life there are police officers or security? Is it possible?
Before getting into that, I guess, hi, my name's Bobby. Just talking about the kind of state of the police right now. You have so much going on where Bill Clinton just said that, LAPD is one of the best examples of police departments, and they should be looked at as the shining hope of for law enforcement. And then you have in New York where you have the police officers declaring war on both the local administration for the mayor's office and the protesters, black community itself. There's both the charade of what the police are supposed to be, but then I think the reality of what they really are is showing.
Hey, it's J-Ray. I think to seriously think or imagine a world without policing and the violence as a punishment system, we have to really think about like how to make people feel safe, because I think a lot of people have this really well-nurtured reliance on the police, which is really just an unhealthy and abusive relationship. But people with privilege or with property or with capital, it's not that abusive for them. The policing system serves particular communities while making casualties of communities of color. We have to think about how to make people of color specifically feel safe and give alternatives to the police.
I think people get afraid when hearing the word abolishing the police. I think living in a society where police are so much a part of our culture and who we are and what people know to like as a social safety net, we as a society, when talking about abolishing the police, is more so like weaning ourselves off of like a drug. How do you wean yourself off of a drug and you start getting like lower and lower doses of it? So when I think about abolishing the police, it's controlling and focusing on their funding, where their money's coming from and how they're spending their money. A world without police is redirecting their training, because they're here, so we have to figure out how to deal with them while they still exist. Like no more weapon buying inside of America from domestic police officers ever again, and just stop that. So these are like some practical things. I use the word practical lightly, knowing that our structure and our system is not going to just allow us to defund the police. It's not going to allow us just to abolish. But these are some things I think.
This is Anton. There are some practical or like pragmatic or egalitarian things that you could apply to what the police are. But at the same time, as soon as you bring those up, like, this is some practical thing you could do, and it would help curb police violence. You know, people are like, oh no, you know, you can't mess with the police, you know, at all. And it's like that, like even just a practical, like reasonable thing, defunding or some sort of reform, it still like incites this sort of reaction in people that it's like wrong or unjust to limit police control or funding in any way, or like mess with their money at all. So that's still like a mindset, I think, in people, is that police like are well deserving of their funding and need money and stuff. You showing them, Bobby?
I do absolutely believe that we can have a world without police officers. I just don't think it's going to happen overnight or just with the flipping of like someone signing like new legislation in. For me, it's like how like do we get there? I think more so is like accountability is the first thing. It's just us as a society, we have to find a way to hold police officers accountable for their behavior. So I feel like we have to get police officers in check first. We have to get them like, hey, you need to stop everything you're doing and start redirecting our energy that way, and then we'll get like one step closer.
Yes, I think it's possible in the same way that I think that it is possible for us to have revolution. But I think that it is necessary for us to be fighting all forms of hierarchy and understand the police as the military for, you know, the establishment in which we are resisting against. And so as the domestic military, you know, it's the same as, you know, the military abroad, like the military abroad. And just like the people in Iraq, you know, can't just like create petitions or like policy or, you know, like push for like, you know, institutional changes of like the U.S. Military that's occupying them. Like, I feel like it's difficult for us to expect to do the same with the police department here on a domestic front. And so I feel like what we can work towards is having like autonomous communities that are working towards like, you know, situations where we're working where we don't necessarily like, in places where you would need the police, like, to actually like do what we give them the power to do, create other systems to be able to kind of substitute that, but also just understanding like the role of the police and why the police do exist, which is like, in my opinion, to protect capital and to criminalize Black people. And so I think that's why any conversation about abolishing the police has to have an intersectional perspective, understanding like why the police were created and like who they oppress the most, which is Black people.
I've seen a lot of practices and attempts to meet the needs of communities without police, but so far it's only been kind of reserved for movement or activist communities, where activist communities will say, like, we're not going to use the police in cases of sexual assault or domestic abuse or violence. You know, we're going to be committed to de-escalating and intervening and teaching ourselves crisis intervention so that we don't have to rely on the police. But I haven't seen that work kind of branch out into what people would consider non-activist communities, like non-openly declared activist communities. And so I'm more interested in like how do we make that a more realistic goal for people who are impoverished, for people who might not have that support network already, for people who might not feel comfortable reaching out to that support network, and communities who already don't feel comfortable reaching out to the police. So I think that it's definitely possible. I think one of the biggest hindrances to empowering those alternatives is a lack of resources and a lack of space because of capitalism. And also the police approach situations of violence or situations of trauma with more violence and more trauma. And so for people who don't want to replicate, it's not that we want another group to do policing. Like, we want alternative methods to like meet these needs and to prevent these cycles of violence without using authoritarian violence ourselves. So I feel like that's also traumatizing work. Crisis intervention can be really traumatizing work. So it affects our mental health. So how do we like sustainably and emotionally create these alternatives without hurting ourselves and creating an actual responsible network to do that? People want to address police brutality and police executions, but getting rid of brutality and execution will still leave the role of the police pretty much fundamentally intact. I don't want good cops. I don't want cops that are not brutal, that will just continue ticketing and imprisoning people, because imprisonment is still a form of violence, and what goes on behind the closed doors in for-profit prison rape culture is just as violent as if they're going to be doing that in the street. So this idea that we can just de-brutalize the cops and make them better public servants, I think does more to restore legitimacy to the cops. And I think what we're seeing right now is a really large opportunity to delegitimize the police.
I think we can have both communities becoming self-reliant and learning like de-escalation skills like crisis intervention, how to support specific teams inside of the community. At the same time, I think we could keep police officers in check. Bobby?
Yeah, I feel like, because I wonder how are we going to enforce it, to me is the question. Because how are we going to get for the police to, like, so say if the plan was to defund the police, right? How are we going to, right now the system in which we would have to, like, urge our legislators to, you know, like, vote to, like, not, you know, put so much for the police in their budget. But then also you have such a private entities that are in control of the police too, like private company or private individuals or companies are paying for, you know, LAPD to go to Israel and for other local law enforcement to do the same thing. So even if we publicly fund it, then how do we handle like the private funding? And so then my question is like when we talk about these things of like what we want the police to do is like what actually are we going to do to make the police do that? Like, because I don't really, I have no faith in our current system. And so because I have no faith in that current system, to me, the only thing I see is to try to no longer have that system exist. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there will be any solution other than the removal of the police system as it currently stands, because the police system as it currently stands is doing nothing but what the police system currently does. What are some ways to limit police street control and street violence and stuff?
I don't think any of these things are going to be easy. I don't think that any route that we as a group of people or as a unit of people try to do is all of it's going to be met with opposition. And there are different levels of what the opposition is going to look like. there are also people who are writing letters to like these legislators, and it would be great if these people who are writing these letters to legislators are framing their letters practical things you can get done. I would like to encourage you to write about this, opposed to saying like don't write these letters, because it's happening. There is like this culture of people who are into like legislative change, because there's going to be all of these levels. It would be great if instead of saying like this shouldn't be done and this shouldn't be done, all of these things be done in helping the people type way. Because I'm not opposed to legislation change. I want to abolish our current structure and our systems of power. Legislative change that's going to make my life a little bit more easier. I'm okay with anything that's going to take some more pressure so people can breathe.
I understand why there are efforts to manipulate the legal system that currently exists to reduce harm. My concern is that usually it doesn't reduce harm. The Prop 47 that just passed, I think, is a good example of it reducing some harm and actually changing some sentences, and people are actually going to get released earlier, and it kind of clarifies a bigger emphasis on how many people are imprisoned for non-violent crimes, which I think is hugely important, but it also draws lines between what is crime that's deserving of compassion, and the prison system puts the blame on people for the structure and the conditions that cause desperation and cause those decisions to be made, so-called crimes against capitalism, theft, so-called crimes of survival, and drug use, which is, like we talked on our last show, a coping mechanism to deal with this messed up system that then is punished, but the people benefiting from it are not being punished, right? The government moving it or dropping it is not being punished. So I'm just worried about the amount of effort and organizing that goes into legislative change. It's not that I would stop it from happening, because I don't have the power. My problem is I don't have the power to stop the laws. They keep on changing. They keep on giving enforcement power. It's the amount of effort that the focus of every movement ends up being co-opted into focusing on radical actions that happen in the street, direct actions for autonomous communities. Those have always been happening and keep consistently getting erased and keep consistently being kind of profited off of to support the political process that exists. I'm just afraid that people want to reform the police to save the police. So I'm kind of, I can't stop the legislative change. I just want to refocus, because if we refocus on autonomous community building, they will give us legislative change. But I think the focus has to be on decreasing reliance, like X says, decruding yourself from the method of thinking that the government or that structure or that legal structure will, in the end, be the solution. And then we've seen reform happen in LA. I think if we push back against legislative change, we'll see more legislative change and we'll see more community involvement. This body cam thing has been talked about for 2-3 years, really popular and didn't get any legislative lip service until the Ferguson uprising. And then as soon as it got lip service, now we find out, the footage isn't going to be available to the public. The footage will only be available in the courts if the prosecutor deems that it can be available in the court. Fine print everywhere.
Also, they can turn it off. That's what also happened is you have police officers who just turn the cameras off. I think for me, back to the question of abolishing the police, I think that if we think of the police, if you think of police as just officers, individuals, and bodies, then that's one thing, right? Then we also have drones, and then we also have the police state, so who's monitoring and surveilling your online or your any sort of any sort of interaction you have with technology. And then we just have also private police, right? And then we have the police mentality, right? Your neighbors watching you and seeing if you're doing something you're not supposed to do. And so to me, when we talk about abolishing the police, it's also sort of talking about abolishing this sort of authoritarian idea we have about how society should be ran and who has authority over it, because in Occupy, sorry to bring it up, but like, I think it's interesting though. It's like immediately there was like security, right? And there was like a security committee, and the security committee had no authority. Who gave them authority? They just like popped out. I didn't give them authority. But they walked around with their little vests, and they started to replicate and act like the police. Same thing happens on marches, right? When you have peace police. Whenever people get permits, then they take it on themselves to actually do the policing for you. That's what we saw happen at the Millions March LA last Saturday, was you start to see people say, get off the sidewalks, you gotta do that, and they get all, ego trip and stuff like that. And, and these individuals who are actually police officers in the uniform, like, they've been existing without, with impunity, So when you think of, what sort of, mentality one society has to give that much power to an individual, but what that individual then goes through, then it's the same way when soldiers come back from war, and they still act as if, they're over to wherever place they were, fighting, they still have that sort of, mentality that this is their domain. And so, it's so layered that I feel like our approach to it is going to be layered.
It's just like the difference between prison abolition and open revolt, which is bring the walls down and stuff like that, free the prisoners and stuff, But I guess my understanding from the topic was that it's more like the prison abolition. Maybe there's work movement towards there, and then that movement can become the open revolt. So I guess my question is what comes first? The prison abolition or the open revolt? Because they both happen simultaneously, right? But what is the spark that leads to the other, or vice versa?
I think they both probably happen at the same time.
I feel it happens simultaneously because I think revolt isn't this end goal. We practice it. I encourage people to practice it. Practice, learn, fail, whatever fail. I've completely had to reimagine what my idea of failure even means, or success even means, because success under capitalism, under the hierarchy, means getting recognition. And the state will never recognize something that threatens its existence. So recognition is not success, So just attempt and practice. I feel like with Prop 47 passing...
Is that the prison one?
That's the one that reduced sentences to misdemeanors.
Okay.
On nonviolent offenses or thefts under $950, but you have to apply. So people weren't just released from the prisons because the bureaucracy will never do that. You have to fill out some paper. First you have to know. So there's always this access barriers. But when they pass that, they're releasing all these people, and they're hoping that crime rises so that they can say this was a bad idea, this is why we need to keep locking people up, this is why incarceration works. So even when they give us reform, the state has a backdoor strategy to make sure that their authoritarian power isn't ever really threatened, and that they can manipulate the outcome to serve them in the end. So with those people coming out, I feel like prison abolition, our goal as people who support prison abolition, should be to create an infrastructure to support those communities that are coming out to transition from prison culture, or to, whatever healing looks like for people, because it looks differently. And then as we create that infrastructure, just talking about what does it mean to general strike, what does it mean to withdraw from the economy, creating this infrastructure, sharing resources, creating autonomous communities so that we're less reliant on the state. And then when we take action against the state, we'll have something to fall back on rather than being isolated and just individuals that are being made to be just individuals. But I also have been really thinking that a good way to abolish prisons would be to abolish the police, or to at least abolish the police in their current function. Because I think, as Bobby said, some body of armed militant, I don't want to use the word militant because I don't want to give them that, but an armed authoritarian body is going to fight the revolution. That's just what it's going to be. So, but in terms of police coming uninvited, because you don't have to call the police for them to show up. They're on beat, they're on patrol, they're hunting, they're sharks. They splash criminalization on anybody in their path, and
some sharks are really sweet.
I know, but sometimes we can't call them pigs.
They're gangs. They are gangs.
No, they are.
And they do what you just described. They patrol and whatever.
But if we can't just tear down the walls, because we got to change the culture to decrease crime, which is increase resources to people, but we can stem the flow of human capital to the prisons. And if we can find a way to obstruct and stop the police's role in targeting communities, we can starve them from filling the prison. So if we want to talk about prison abolition, we have to talk about prison prevention. And I feel like targeting the police, and even talking about the language of like harassing the police, like not affirming the police. I haven't really explored it, but I think that's a good method to work towards prison abolition.
Did you want to say that?
I think the thing about, like, to me, I understand liberalism as, like, feeling sort of, like, bad about something, but at the same time, like, you know, it doesn't directly affect you and you actually, like, necessarily, like, benefit from it. So it's like you be sympathetic to it, but you can't really be empathetic to it. And so, like, I say that because, like, I feel like revolt is what pushes, like, abolishing anything or changing anything, because I think that it takes for people to be uncomfortable for them to like actually do what's necessary that's going to push for change, you know? Like the reason why we're seeing people on the streets is because like so many people are like being exposed to like the fact that, you know, that the police are like starting to kill more people, you know, and like with the sort of like film culture or just social media in general, we're hearing more about it. And so I think that like the police also are obtaining more powers, and we're just seeing like different systems of the government fail. And I think because of that, people are revolting more, and I see revolt as more just like each battle, you know? So like last night people went on the 110 freeway, you know, that was a revolt. And like, you know, there's also the like micro individual revolts, right? Like you went to work and dealt with your oppressive boss, you know. But on like the macro level,
you stole something.
Yeah. Like, but like on a macro level, like I see revolts as every time we have uprisings in the streets, and so I feel like that pushes and urges us to do more, and the more we're comfortable, the less we're going to do that. So, you know, the more that, you know, the police are just like, sort of like, you know, just like paroling you and maybe only giving you tickets instead of like shooting you and threatening you, the less likely you're going to want to abolish them. And so I think that, yeah, so just to answer that question.
For a lot of people who are light-skinned in America, when something bad happens to you or when you do something bad, justice is served because everything, all the conditions are there for them to, you know, serve justice to you. You know, you are exactly who they are expecting to serve justice to. People's perception of police and morals and the law and stuff is like really, really backwards, I think, right now. And it's not, you know, it's crime when a black person does it. But if it's like a white person, then it's not even registered. It doesn't even register to people that that's even like a thing. Like white people stealing cars, quote unquote, like violent crime still includes like crime against property because that's still considered like violent, I guess. So if you like break something or something like that, or destroyed like
if it's like house. Over a certain amount,
I think it depends on the context of where you break. So if you break something inside of like Walmart, the cops might shoot you.
Anything to change the immediate fear and violence culture that involves the police, which they're just this like official violating force. They're, in terms of goals when it comes to police, I rarely even hear, now I hear talks of police reform, but before, police reform is like something you get like once every 10 years, maybe, like not something that's really made that accessible. So now to have the dialogue change so much, you can see the disconnect when you're in the streets. People are yelling at the cops and they're saying like, we don't need you, we know you don't meet our needs, you know, they're yelling at the cops. I mean, this person was like, you're probably KKK, you're probably KKK, you're probably KKK. They still serve the same interests as white supremacy. And then to see people chanting abolish the police in the streets, and then by the time that rhetoric gets put into articles or onto news radio stations or onto the mainstream news, there's no mention of abolishing the police. So just to see where the focus in the popular movement building, like where it does lie, whether it's a practical or reasonable goal or not, it's empowering to talk about police abolition, trying to just reframe the dialogue. And anything the police do, we can do better. Whatever function or goal people want to restore in the police or they think the police should serve, any person, any people, any group could do that, could meet those needs without all the baggage and bureaucracy and violence. In the end, I feel like they have too much power, and there's this huge mythos of them being invincible and untouchable, and I feel like they're just an organization. Like, they're an organization of people that is structured in a hierarchy that has a very clear bureaucracy, and any organization can be delegitimized and changed. So, like, police are scary, and they're this, like, they have this terrible terrorist function, but they're an organization, and organizations can be abolished.
Yes, police are an organization, but they're also a very heavily, like, weaponized organization. When I think of capitalism, the three people that benefit off militarized local police, which is like, it's not just America's which police are becoming militarized, we're now starting to see it around the world, and that's just, you know, because people are making money off selling, like, old weapons off to these local police officers. So when we think of, like, Russia, Israel, and America, which are the three largest weapons manufacturer, I think we also need to talk about, like, the military-industrial complex, and stopping that, you know, because we're still having weapons being made. You know, we could talk about how, like, it's still going to go, you know, and the, like, it's still going to go, like, be sold underground. And so my whole thing is, like, back to, like, the practical application of things. Like, how do we stop people when they already have the weapons? How do we get the weapons from them? And how do you fight against people with weapons like that? You know, how do you take away someone who has, like, a large arsenal? How do you fight against that? Like, how do you, like, take their weapons? Like, practically, like, how do we take their weapons? Like, do we walk door to door and say, well, hey, this is the new law, you have to give us all your weapons, because, like, isn't there saying, like, with my, like, cold, dead hands or something like that, you would have to pry it? Who said that? That one actor said it at an NRA speech. And so it's, like, Charleston Heston. And so, like, you know, like, how, I just want to know how we're going to do it. Like, you know, and what does that look like? And I feel like it's going to look, like, I feel like it looks complicated. And so I'm not saying, like, it can't be done, but I just think the complicated part to me is one that, like, I'm still myself unclear what it looks like. So, yes, I want all these things to happen. I guess I just want to start knowing, like, how.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like I just have, like I have, like, an awareness of, like, being, like, well, if I'm walking somewhere, like, I have this understanding that police could just, like, easily hurt me, you know, or just, like, do something crazy, you know, and, like, just having that understanding is very strange because, like, I guess so many people, like, don't really, just don't believe that at all, like, oh, you're paranoid, you know, like, but it's, you know, that's the way it is for most people in America, you know, and so weapons, I guess, like, one thing that Hollywood has taught me about weapons is that lots of police have other weapons. That is, you know what I mean? Like, they have their weapons, those are the police weapons, and then they go home, they have more weapons, and those are their weapons, you know? So, that's kind of scary. The police mentality, in my opinion, stems specifically from the feeling or the emotion that you get from, like, having a weapon at your side pretty much 24 hours a day, you know? And then, you know, there's this, like, turn in your badge and your weapon, right? Because you're not a police officer anymore, so you no longer can use the weapon that the state gave you to police people, you know? These two weapons, your badge and your gun. But, at the end of the day, they still do have their guns, you know? And, like, the nature of prison abolition and this, like, sort of open revolt or, like, anti-police prison rhetoric mentality is, like, the key to both of them, I think, is, like, a cultural shift or, like a mental thing, because I think it has more to do with, like, the actual, like the mental state, you know, like the policing, like, I'm going to police you, you know, because there's, like, the police, and then, like, the woman was chanting, like, also there's the KKK, and the KKK is also the police at the same time, and so, like, you know, so there's, you know, we're not just dealing with the police, right? Because, like, you could say all the time that there's, like, these good police officers, you know, and there's these, like, you know, there's these good cop, bad cop thing, you know, and then you say that, but then the two police officers who were killed in New York City just happen to be two cops of color, you know. I find that really interesting, you know, even in there was a black cop who got shot by a white cop, right? Like, while the black cop was off duty. So there's that too, you know, there's like, there's that race stuff going on within the police. And so I don't think that it is just necessarily the police that we're dealing with. I think it's also like whoever the police hang out with, you know? Yeah, police hang out with, who are they talking to and what are they talking about, and...
Yeah, I think about that too. The mental state is really, I think, changing people's like idea of what like being a police officer. The first, I think, is, you know, one of the things we can focus on is getting people to stop wanting to be police officers. If we could just get that to happen, then all these other things just start happening. We have to just start waiting till these other officers start getting old and, like, you know, like nature taking its course and them dying off and stuff, you know, like, but until then, you know, like, people actually have this mental, like, people want to be police officers. Outside of LAPD for Iselle Ford, there was this woman out there with her son. And they are of black skin, and the son was talking about how he wants to be a police officer. This is at anti-police brutality, like, speak out in front of LAPD's office. And this mother was communicating, my son wants to be a police officer, and I don't want him to be one, but if he wants to, it's okay. And I think that needs to change too, you know. When kids tell their mothers they're going off to war, most mothers, depending on the culture in which you're from, is going to say, hey, don't join the army, don't join the military. That should be the same culture of, hey, don't join the police officers, don't become a police person. And once that starts to be uncool, then I think we'll start to see other things as well. But I think it has a lot to do with, like, people's, like, perception. It's still these internalized things that people have when it comes to, like, superiority hierarchy, like race, gender, class, that's so deeply in our minds that we're perpetuating them in whatever work atmosphere you're in. So I do think that revolt also is that personal revolt of, like, that individual revolt that you need to go through, of questioning these things. Why are you afraid of this person? Why are you talking to this woman this way? X, Y, and Z.
I think also, like, resisting against just, like, the police mentality too is like really going after bully culture. Police officers are just, like, grown-up bullies, you know. It was interesting because I know LAPD was working on a campaign against like one of those, like, anti-bullying campaign, which is, like, you know, and they're speaking to, like, youth about, like, you know, not bullying, when it's like, you know, what else are you doing other than harassing and bullying people on the street? You know, the poor person sitting on the sidewalk and you go up and like, who are you doing? You know, it's just like total macho bully behavior.
I'm bigger than you.
Yeah, and so, like, I feel like sort of at, like, a young age challenging that, and then also, like, you know, not allowing them into classrooms, because I think, like, kids at a young age, you know, like, the reason why they want to be cops is because it's part of what we're taught, that cops are good. We see most of the TV shows on TV right now are about cops. Cops are very humanized, but, like, criminals are not, you know. And so, like, we're always, you know, taught to, like, you know, support, just like we're taught to support your troops, we're taught to support cops. Like, when the two police officers were allegedly killed by that one black man in New York, the mayor was like, you know, the whole city is mourning. And, you know, it's this whole mentality that, you know, two cops' lives, you know, matter much more than the fact of, like, why there was such unrest going on in your city in the first place. You know, it's that they are valued more. They're also paid very well. You know, LAPD are paid very, very well. And so someone who, like, doesn't have too many opportunities and, like, get paid lots of money, you become a kind of officer, and the same reason why people usually sign up for to go to fight war. And I feel like the reason why you don't have mothers, you know, or fathers telling their kids to go off to war is because they were getting killed. So yeah, I feel like there's a sort of protection plus privilege you get being a police officer. You get to do whatever the heck you want. You know, you get to do whatever you want and get away with it. You kill someone, you're not going to do anything, you get paid vacation, you become rich, you can, like, make a painting. You become a millionaire, you know? Like, what incentive is it not to be a cop?
And that's why the most bigoted fucking people become police officers, because you can kill black people and get away with it. You know, you can kill people of color and get away with it.
It's basically a one-sided war where
They feel
one
there.
side can use as much violence. One side can use as much violence as they want, and the other side can't even twitch or like non-comply in like one way, or they'll be executed or imprisoned. It is a war. It's just not like there's no like two.
One side doesn't know.
One side can't fight back.
And it's also like there's also the side. Generationally, you've been in war to a point where it's more of the adapting. Human beings, when we adapt to our environment, right? That's what makes human beings us. We adapt to environments, whether they're cold, hot, and our bodies like change depending upon the atmosphere and the environment. So if you're always in an environment of oppression and violence, it starts to be a part of your culture. It starts to be a part of just living. So like those who've always had to resist, it's just a part of who we are, to a point where I don't think of it being war when I go out on the street. And police officers are taught that there's a war on the street. So I think that's teaching people that, hey, there's a war going on. There's been a war. It's race, class, gender, spiritual. It's all these wars that are happening, psychological, that are happening so consistently that we don't even process. And the reason I say that is Million March LA, we ended in the Jewish community. The march ended in the Jewish community. And I thought just about the psychological implications of a predominantly black march marching to a Jewish community. I don't know psychologically what that does. So if people understand that there is a war that is going on so many different levels, we'll question these things when we go to here. Why are we going to City Hall? Why are we going to the police station, protesting there, and then everyone going home and feeling so disempowered? Psychologically, what is that doing? We're in a consistent state of war.
Thank you for listening to On Resistance. Feel free to catch our full show online at soundcloud.com/on-resistance. Also, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, on Tumblr, Instagram, On Resistance. Alright, well, thank you guys again, and Happy New Year. Stay fresh.
With these pains and it's on days. Don't give a fuck about where you from, leave you slumped and it's on go. I'm bumping Draco, got us drunk, come out the window, please bump, bow, bow. Leave me dead, but don't call my phone, I'm being investigated by DOJ and the feds. Had a minute wasted, I'm tired, that's how I play. Watch as soon as I get in here, make all the kids inside my bed. Then I switch the bop, nigga, take a bitch and back the pillow. They know I like bodies, I get bodies with the signs, niggas. They know I be wildin' from my mama house, I shot in that. Fuck shit, spit, all these pussy niggas talking about switch shop, we ain't automatic. Rigs thinking over business, pop his ass, we drop his ass, that be that green flag activity. All these niggas talking about killing me, so bitch, let's get it started. They know I be the murder man, we bust springs up in that water. Hold on, swim like you a shark, bitch. Show 'em he a goldfish, show 'em how that pole hit. Walk out with that phone, hold on, talking about that glitch switch, my nigga, get your soul. Know you heard about all these bodies, we be wildin'. Shorty got the ass, smiley baby, I'm a hoe. Done Julio, but smiley before he got out of the cottage. 40 to a pool before I go to Diddy body. Makeup on my face, so either way, bitch, you don't want my problems. They know I'm gonna flip body. They know I don't give no fuck. They know they don't wanna see me film. Jump them out that truck. They know corner rolling like a 6 bucks. You know I'm a thug ass nigga, hold that mouth and I'ma throw it out. In this bitch, I wet this bitch for innocent. I buy my baby mama anything because I'm really rich. I pull up on that silly shit, I'm leaving, but it's time I pay. Fight me, I'ma pop it. So mad, you would catch me in that Maybach thing. Now this chopper came automatic, red big, and know the business. Pop his ass, we drop his ass, that be that green flag activity. All these niggas talking about killing me, so bitch, let's get it started. They know I be the murder man, we bust springs up in that water. Hold on, swim like you a shark, bitch. Show 'em around convicts and shit. Pussy ass nigga, they don't like me. Bitch, I don't like you neither. I wonder who gon' ride for me if it go down. And I start to get this feeling like who gon' be there for my sons the day that I'm not around. I hope you love me as much as I love I'm taking on accolades. I'ma put up a star. We gon' do a drive-by in the rain. I'ma take it to trial. But they know that I beat the game. I jump out in your house, I ain't shoot from the gun. Man bought me a bitch, but I really don't want. I don't do no capping, I keep it 100. Right now I'm recording with 10,000 on. He say he want smoke, but I know he don't want. Shoot him in this bitch and I up on his home. You know how I'm feeling, I don't gotta say it. Face ain't proud, all by my lungs. Put my eyes in the camera. I ain't going outside. So I'm taking on accolades. I'ma put up a star. I'ma do a drive-by in the rain. I'ma take it to trial. But they know that I beat the Baby Joe got shot in front of his child. Wonder why I'm flagging, but I don't stop. Wanna get up, but wonder why that I can't stop. It is to be dead or gone. I don't wanna leave. I say fuck, I'm sorry. All my pain got me heartless. I just wanna find some peace. But I'm like Mr. Reaper. I do not mean to disturb your time. I just wanna ask you, can you leave my family out? You got it hard, and most all my niggas laying up in the graveyard. You that boy, I ain't do that shit for you. Me and Jay cut your heart while we riding in that coupe. I been in and out the system, but every time make it through. GD gang got a difference. We're a family, not a crew, not a squad. Since I came out the front yard, my life has been so hard. Grew up around killer and a whole lot of dogs. I am a shiner, got bad as the chauffeur. So please forgive your son, cause I know what I'm to be dead or gone. I don't wanna leave. I say fuck, I'm sorry. All my pain got me heartless. I just wanna find some peace. But I'm like Mr. Reaper. I do not mean to disturb your time. I just wanna ask you, can you leave my family out? You got it hard, and most all my niggas laying up in the graveyard. Boozilla died, Lee Tuck died, and Lee Joy got shot months from there. He had a child. AJ and 3 got shot, but only one is still alive. Don't dead, Jordan still in heaven, know you fly. I've been thugging since a child, tired of playing with that fire. Turned 5, came on slang, getting dirty clutching in the ride. This shit hurt my heart sometimes, but I'm grown, I'm not a child. Gotta calculate my moves, what if I slip up and die? Why I ain't died as a child? Baby Joe got shot in front of his child. Wonder why I'm flagging, but I don't stop. Wanna get up, but wonder why that I can't stop. It is to be dead or gone. I don't wanna leave. I say fuck, I'm sorry. All my pain got me heartless. I just wanna find some peace. But I'm like Mr. Reaper. I do not mean to disturb your time. I just wanna ask you, can you leave my family out? You got it hard, and most all my niggas laying up in the graveyard.
Rel on the track. They stop playing, they blow my shit. She just pulled up some heat. My young nigga serving heat in the mall. She threw a fit. I bet 6 bands on his feet. He don't even say that you're nowhere. Pull a long chopstick out a book bag, get a photo one. Best believe I get my eyes from her. She this ain't golden sun. Nah, let him fall, they go stand over him. My little kid don't know what no mean. I'm sweet from cold days. She got the sands I won't have, not no other things. That shit had me tripping. My bankroll crippin'. I fucked her from the back, now she crippled. One hand on neck, one hand on front. She on her way to the riddle. I'm the lifeline, the source, boy, I'm nowhere in the middle. Been a boss since I was little, stay 100 from the start. Got reflectors on my Dior's, make them light up in the dark. I work baked by my shark, no breaking bitches hearts. My little bro don't know where to slaps, but I can put him on that Fendi with a low on it. I know where to get it from. She say she ain't never had a
all the night. How many bags of Dior can I bring on this flight? The work balance like a magic trick. Fuck shit, goddamn, she think she all that in the bag of chips. My boss look like a bag of grits. Water full on my jeans and in my cup, I feel like activist. I ain't sipping lean and shooting shots, I'm not an activist. This nigga with his 308, he threw a backwards flip. He run up on me in the wrong bag, you get your candle lit. Real on the track, I hit her, never call her back. I can't get attached. This hoodie I got on the rack.
Other niggas can compete with them. Turn my ass up the box on you, I'ma rock the beat like a beat. Nigga, help me get where my waist is at. Bitch, yeah, I'm real bad. Sick it like soul food, only real niggas can taste that. Know you wanna fuck, I'm like, come on, baby, what's up? He like, baby, where you at? I'm like, boy, I'm pulling up. Niggas fuck me up with my legs on. Let him hit it, had his head gone. Got soft in our head, all niggas out doing bad wrong. Wanna pull it, I'ma let the nigga, cause he paying for it just to get it done. He told my nigga, don't be scared now, take the safety off, I'm tryna make it glad. Girl, I'm tryna wipe it, I ain't tryna be no wife behind it. Touch it, go one night and block a nigga while he typing. He like,
baby, what you doing? Come on, I've been missing you. I wanna fuck. I know you can tell by how I'm kissing you. I know you say you like it when I get to rubbing you. Okay, come on, baby girl, and let me rub on you. Baby, what you doing? Baby, what you doing? Baby, what you doing? Come on, I've been missing you. Baby, what you doing? Baby, what you doing? Baby, what you doing? Come on, I've been missing you. What I just heard about come on, bro, let's hurry up and make the block. No, y'all should listen to our blah, blah, blah. Come on, let's go right now. Don't gotta be nighttime. I pull up with that stick swinging like I lost my sight. Or run around, they bite. Get hit and see the light. Get hit and they get bright. Get hit, you lose your life. Get hit and then you dead. I be red, I got a red eye. We laid them down round 9 p.m. You think he had a bedtime. It's on the clock, it's bedtime. Ain't got no damn mind. Remember me and Ian went on that. I'm tripping, never mind. Get low, tiptoe, creep. But all you need, ski mask, chopstick, let's go, hopped out, boom, boom, sleep. Told me and now teach you how to work that motherfucker. Chop, chop. Dining, all my jewels on. We don't got no heart, but all us got chrome. We like some fucking pillows, everybody touch on. We like some lax it up, we all get shit on. All us was wearing masks before that COVID shit. Been staying away from niggas before that COVID hit. Ops don't come out and they blame that corona shit. But when I catch them, I got a shot for them next time. I know vaccine, bitch. I can't believe what I just heard. The opposite side. Come on, bro, let's hurry up and make a block. No, y'all should look too hot. Blah, blah, hit that boy from 6 different sides like a hexagon. You know my shit call me LeBron, so we do that every time. Let these short, but he gon' bang that bitch and shoot a leprechaun. We hit him with Ramadan. All my bitches eating boy in the ghetto. Why the fuck is you sitting up here crying? Give me a kiss and shut her up. Girl, you know I'm full too. Texas boy and set him up. Girl, you know I'm full too. These niggas be trippin', they be tweaking. These niggas ain't gangsta, I be peepin'. Bitch. These niggas is hoes, I be seeing. I be saying that shit. These niggas be lying, I believe them. These niggas be poppin' up. Gang, gang, poppin' up. Gang, 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 gang. Everybody scrap that. Everybody scrap that. Everybody scrap that. Bang, poppin' up. Gang, 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 poppin' up. Poppin' up. Gang, 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 poppin' up. Poppin' up. Gang, 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 poppin' up. Poppin' up. Gang, 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 poppin' up.
Pop out with them killer, man, we in the nigga story. Take the nigga out in glory, boy, your mind hit a shorty. Man, I think this shit a game, like I'm rich on my floor, bitch on curveball. The rapper who put 50s on 40s, man, I swear y'all. I spit on wacko murder when we bored. I'm sending a hit from the studio, get killed while I'm recording. Free shots out that case, she getting annoying. Broke the old head up in the sky, she AD for some joints. I'm out of town, don't ask me, am I strap pussy, of course. 2 switches on me now, we got more shots than the Air Force. Hey, pussy, of course. 2 switches on me now, we got more shots than the Air Force. 2 switches on me now, get them wet through them force. 2 switches on me now.
Everybody scrap that. Everybody scrap that. Everybody scrap that. Bang, poppin' up. Gang, 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 poppin' up. Poppin' up. Gang, 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 poppin' up. Poppin' up. Gang, 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 poppin' up. Poppin' up. Gang, 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 poppin' up.
See, I think we got one.
This whole thing she classy. This whole thing she sassy. No bitch, you was ratchet. You little fucking hoe. They say sucking dick a habit. You little fucking hoe. Won't let the semen hit the camera. Won't let it hit the floor. Your bitch a alley. Your bitch a nigga a slack. Your bitch a rat a tat. That pussy dead, go get the cat. Your bitch a knit. Gotta hear you worthless in your bag. Your bitch a bunny rapping. Hopping set to set to set. Your bitch a ground cap. Lying to them folks. Streets and ass. Go home, miss up on the floor. Your corner, but it's steering wheel. So you know she do the most. But all them niggas. Tell me, bitch, that ain't no boat. Bitch, that ain't no boat. Bitch, get in your bag. You look fucking slick. You look fucking wet. $1 million nigga. You ain't even got no check. This bitch she ain't got no more. Ready to fuck the set. Ready to fuck the set. Who the fuck made you hoes? Bitch think you classy. You is not that. Think you sassy. You not that. You was a motherfucking thot. This whole thing she classy. This whole thing she sassy. No bitch you a ratchet. You look fucking hoe. She say sucking dick and have it. You look fucking hoe. Won't let the semen hit the canvas. Won't let it hit the floor. Bitch a alligator beside me. Bitch your name a slick. Bitch a rat a tat. That pussy dead go get the gat. Bitch a knick-knack. You worthless. You look bad. Bitch a bunny rabbit. Hopping set to set to set. Bitch a alley cat. 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 Yeah, alley cat. Commit suicide, that might be for me. Cause either way you did, but I know you rather you would than me. I don't got no manners, I don't got no manners. We some new school, that's all we roll now. It's a like a branch, flip it like banana. I don't got no motherfucking sense. I don't got no motherfucking sense. I ain't getting in that car if that window don't got photo. And them niggas ain't no odds if that block ain't get beat. I ain't one shot that kid if that chop ain't hit shit. Rolling, bitch, I'm rolling, but not deep. When I say rolling, I mean slide, I'm not something off the feet. You see bars, you see E, you see two, you see me. I see up, I reach in, this for life, and I see. I ain't have no pots, I got hoes, bitch, I'm peeping. Wanna fuck on your camera, give me your phone, bitch, you tripping. Say we can't need a pee. That nigga always sleep, but he can't help because he got a lot of shots and a lot of knots and beats. She say you ain't shit, I say I know, I need to laugh at her. I ain't sure if my mama, cause she just ain't bad at her. They want that shit so bad with me, but they just not fast enough. I got all them sticks, I'm trying to slide, it just ain't adding up. No, swing down, you flip, bust a brain, drop your nuts, let them hang, I'm in the mood to bust a brain. Shit, we gang, 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 gang. My dog a walking lullaby, for shit sweet. I be with war, but just no catching wood. She gon' ahead and commit suicide, that might be for me. Cause either way you did, but I know you rather you would than me. I don't got no manners, I don't got no manners. We some new screws, that's why we all hammers. Look at her like a branch, flip it like banana. I don't got no motherfucking I say KD, you niggas know it's so me, so me, so me, so me. So fucking mean, she made niggas run away from us. Ain't call me 20, you ain't never let it rip. Rolling with 230 clips, we pulling up like milk. Tsunami the block, I think them bitches need a sip. Only then we flip when we got acrobatic clip. This like 7 pints in here, bro, we do not need no alarm. Just gotta switch and hold a 100, just gon' shoot away my arm. Shooting at that mix, had to go home up on my phone. Kinda slide, knock off flesh, you can ask again, nigga, I ain't know. Anybody that know me, say I'm telling you I'm not ready. Stay with me, I make fine, and you put them out their schedule. You about to do a drill, make sure you leave a schedule. I know you a wicked bitch, I hear that on the regular. Stay with me, you. Stay with me, you. Stay with me, you. on top of this, I'm getting dropped in skirts.
Your Chanel and Louis outside. Niggas told bro, I swear to God, you fat. Cookies that cold with a man. Standing here, we put it up there. How you selling that? He ain't drop shit. We standing here, we call it block bag. Block bag, rolling in the lane, throw that big shit down. This nigga in the city, a fool. I came up off a pew, bitch, you red, man. Legs, niggas in the city, all hoes. Know about that deal, big homie took on this man. Shit down till I retire. Back to back, me and money wire. Say I ain't the church, bitch, we liars. Ain't free on the prize. Free woo, but ain't in the feds, and I see woo. Bad big bikes in my very cool. Still supplying, I sell free juice. Bitch, we was never eat at all. The nigga hating on me. Nigga hating on Reese. Still yelling free speed, MD. Doggy down, bitch, work big. Warning, I made $1 million on the corner. Niggas pouring. I had $1 million kinda went Florida. Remind me of a bitch named Stewie in my bag. Go your Chanel and Louis at the time. Niggas told bro, I swear to God, you fat. Cookies that cold with a man. We standing there, we call it up bag. How you selling that? He ain't drop shit. I'll ever run into him, I'ma blow his ass down.
Me got butterfingers, caught her off and then I drop it at. Riding in the bed with a little lady in the alphabet. Got the ear, try to follow this bed. I ain't worried about the shit. Type of nigga that'll kill a whole set. 5, 6 shots at his neck. I love my dogs, I'm doing like Vic. Got Neen on my side, yeah, I took it like Chris. And these bullets out of lips, yeah, give a nigga kiss. If a nigga play with that shit, a whole lot of fix. If a nigga play with that stick, a whole lot of dick. Dead man, yeah, that C. He play with the game, now he in the sleep. Dead man, yeah, that C. He play with the game, now he deceased. Whitman, yeah, that's me. He call the shots and rap on beat. Whitman, yeah, that's me. He a little wicked nigga ass. Hitting on niggas, a whole lot of sauce. Get right, niggas, there's a whole lot of y'all. He play with me, he got a whole lot of balls. He been sucking for an hour, got a whole lot of jaws. I went like a shower, she couldn't even wear drawers. And the legs kept shaking, she couldn't even stand tall. Riding in the bed with a little lady in the alphabet. Got the ear, try to follow this bed. I ain't worried about the shit. Type of nigga that'll kill a whole set. 5, 6 shots at his neck. When these bullets take off, they gon' off the whole set. Y'all sing like Quavo, don't get scared. He move like me, go country band. He got like Kango, move that head. Whitman, yeah, that's me. Whitman, yeah, that's me. Little wicked nigga, as you can see. You put the bitch in double C. Ain't no good, but a double sin. If one trap come from overseas.
had one wish, I wish for 100 choppers. I wish for 100 commas. Hey man, I wish a nigga never said a word to me, cause I be starting to run. My niggas eating cook-ups. When they don't do much, niggas die, get shot, they point fingers like they know it's an high lie before I ever testify to me, you know shit. I be in them all dropping, just be grabbing what I like, just like the gram. If I'm in her likes, I hit her like a fight. Shit, we don't do lights, we run them like the hoes that turn dykes. And that's a nigga like my dog, he a deep inside the night. Your homie, he a kite, I roll him up before I hit the bed at night. Little nigga, I'm a different breed, yo bitch suck the dick for like an hour, she got some different needs. This smooth nigga get in the car, turn easy to speed. My dog made $1 million off the phone, he got the hook up like Master P. Shit, if I had one wish, I wish all the hoes I used to fuck when I was broke off my dick. Talking shit, man, I'm a job, I make a bitch quit. Man, free bro, they gave my nigga half a 60, he ain't flint. Niggas swerving lane to lane like I'm drunk, niggas plunks, lock boy, we got an ARL 30 like a month. Around with an elephant, this bitch ain't in the trunk. Man, 223s, they'll leave a nigga stinking like a skunk. I get out of control, get out my shit, man, fake rapper, I be leaving the studio, tucking my blick, fake rapper. I'm really Gucci man 2006. Man, real niggas still be in the hood, shooting $4-5 for my blood niggas. I done bopped and really banged it. Me and bro gon' try to put some shit together, we see a chain hang. First time I popped the nigga, I hit him twice and I wasn't even aiming. Man, now I be shooting and hitting everything like Damon. Hey, I tried to tell them boys, I'm a vet for real. Find a town that ain't nobody been to, you can get a meal. Niggas for real, niggas catching bullets out here in that field. Fuck a deal, the contracts we be seeing, getting niggas killed. Nigga, all the hoes love me, I'm that nigga. Cool, they like how y'all boys catch the last eye. Real stupid, nigga couldn't call me, but he was goofy. Shitty price on me with it, bitch, told me ready to use it, I'ma use it. Till to make a nigga disappear, like I know Cosmo and Wanda. But if I had one wish, I wish for 100 choppers. I wish for 100 commas. Hey man, I wish a nigga never said a word to me, cause I be starting to my niggas eating cook-ups.
Quick to take a nigga life, that's how I rock it. Eat sneaky ass, just pull the pint out his pocket. Pop a hot top and then catch a flight out the counter. Punch a nigga in his face, knock his eye out the socket. Ballin' on another level, this the major league. I spend whatever on some drink, but I don't pay for weed. PLR with the green tips, I love the way it sing. A nigga want my bars on his song, he gotta pay the fee.
Hit me up like we gotta do another track. Your dope mix call me, but for the sun, call my cousin Track. Who got a reels I plug? I need 100 pack. I ain't going back and forth with you ain't seen 100 racks. Yeah, I'm talking about 1,000 blues. Or 2050s, nigga, it don't matter. It's really up to you. Let me call my nigga Mike Kidd. He got a bust his chin, get shot like 27 times. Bullets jumping.
We the real A-team, nigga, check the roster. Auntie hit my line with a pint for $11. Off a perk, I beat her back in, she got a better posture. What the fuck, my head ain't come this week, let me check my doctor. He told me pull up to the office, he can spare a 10. Got a bitch sucking dick on camera, had to tell her friend. Fucking too spicy for the game, they had to let us in. I can out-rap you all night, this shit'll never done.
Real with 10 hoes by myself, throw my meat around. I'm still running up a bag. You don't see me around, I'm really somewhere like a housemaid. I clean the house. 5, 6 niggas at one time, it can get crazy. Today I looked up and found a pint of wine for $6.80. Fuck the up, then I nutted quick and made the bitch pay me. The Rolls truck look pretty factory and it's real spacious. Yeah, get up boy shit. What up Jamal? What up Mike? Y'all know what the fuck going on. Free the hub, get up.
Snuck a small Glock in the club, just a 380. Reed hit me with a hardball, but I'm not G-baby. Dumb nigga pay $800 just for 380. No, I cannot cuff a bitch that got 3 babies. No, cause I'm a selfish nigga. You got a gun, I got a gun too, but my weapon bitch. Lay a hand on one of my guys, he'll get that tremendous.
I just found a plug overseas, I'ma need a boat. Sick, I'm back blowing, I just bought a whole P to smoke. You can buy 8 out this pint, I'ma keep a 4. I know that's only 12 rounds, I'm finna drink a 4. Hit dog in his head, he survived, but he can't blink no more. She hit her pussy with some vinegar, it don't stink no more. Nigga run off on the gang, he ain't probably gonna have feet no more. 80 racks on me, pockets full, I can't eat no more.
Papa Perk beat my bitch down. Papa Perk beat my bitch. Yeah. Papa Perk beat my bitch down. Made her sweep the floor. Last week I cut into a married bitch like you cheap for sure. I need half off on everything I buy. Yeah, I'm cheap for sure. I just ran up some dog shit about a week ago. I only fuck her Saturday morning. This my weekend hoe. Walking down Rodeo Drive, I got a sleeve to blow.
I just swiped the card and sold 100 grams too. Then hit the booth and did a verse for 5 bands. New piece on the way, cost 5 plus 10 times too. Fucked all my bitch best friends, I be lying too. Just know a nigga kill me, he dying too. Bitch open up the pussy, finna dive through. I love catching stupid niggas slipping at the drive. Don't give a fuck who the target. Mike bustin', I'm firing through. life, that's how I rock it. Eat sneaky ass, just pull the pint out his pocket. Pop a hot top and then catch a flight out the counter. Punch a nigga in his face, knock his eye out the socket. Ballin' on another level, this the major league. I spend whatever on some drink, but I don't pay for weed. PLR with the green tips, I love the way it sing. A nigga want my bars on this song, you gotta pay the fee.
Hit me up like we gotta do another track. Your dope mix, call me before the sun, call my cousin track. Who got a reels I plug? I need 100 pack. I ain't going back and forth with you ain't seen 100 racks. Yeah, I'm talking about 1,000 blues or 2050s, nigga, it don't matter. It's really up to you. Let me call my nigga Mike Kidd. He got a bust his chin, get shot like 27 times. Bullets jumping.
We the real A-team, nigga, check the roster. Auntie hit my line with a pint for $11. Off a perk, I beat her back in, she got a better posture. What the fuck, my head ain't coming this week, let me check my doctor. He told me pull up to the office, he can spare 10. Got a bitch sucking dick on camera, had to tell her friend. Fucking too spicy for the game, they had to let us in. I can out-rap you all night, this shit'll never done.
Real with 10 hoes by myself, throw my meat around. I'm still running up a bag. You don't see me around, I'm really somewhere like a housemaid. I clean the house. 5, 6 niggas at one time, it can get crazy. Today I looked up and found a pint of wine for $6.80. Fuck the hoe, then I nutted quick and made the bitch pay me. The road truck look pretty factory and it's real spacious.
Yeah, get up boy shit, man. What up, Jamal? What up, Mike? Y'all know what the fuck going on. Free the hoe, get up. Snuck a small Glock in the club, just a 380. Reed hit me with a hardball, but I'm not G-baby. Dumb nigga pay $800 just a 380. No, I cannot cuff a bitch that got 3 babies. No, cause I'm a selfish nigga. You got a gun, I got a gun too, but my weapon big. Lay a hand on one of my guys, he'll get that tremendous.
I just found a plug overseas, I'ma need a boat. Sick, I'm back blowing, I just bought a whole beat of smoke. You can buy 8 out this pint, I'ma keep it 4. I know that's only 12 rounds, I'm finna drink a 4. Hit dog in his head, he survived, but he can't blink no more. She hit her pussy with some vinegar, it don't stink no more. Nigga run off on the gang, he ain't probably gonna have feet no more. 80 racks on me, pockets full, I can't eat no more.
Papa perk, beat my bitch down. Papa perk, beat my bitch. Yeah. Papa perk, beat my bitch down. Made her sweep the floor. Last week I cut into a married bitch like you cheap for sure. I need half off on everything I buy. Yeah, I'm cheap for sure. I just ran up some dog shit about a week ago. I only fuck her Saturday morning. This my weekend hoe. Walking down Rodeo Drive, I got a sleeve to blow.
I just swiped the card and sold 100 grams too. Then hit the booth and did a verse for 5 bands. New piece on the way, cost 5 plus 10 times 2. Fucked all my bitch best friends, I be lying too. Just know a nigga kill me, he dying too. Bitch, open up the pussy, finna dive through. I love catching stupid niggas slipping at the drive. Don't give a fuck who the target. Mike bustin', I'm firing
Now we ballin'. Had the hoe to the block list, she keep calling. I can't stay away from walkout, we meet often. Drink in my cup, I can't stop like the brakes gone. Half a pint in my 2 liter, it's a 8 ball. Money make my hotline bling like that Drake song. Pop every witness that I seen in the case closed. PLR with 100 rounds, shoot for 7 minutes. I can't be around that broke shit, I got a better vision. Out of town looking for the bag, I need a better ticket. Off a perk, I beat her back in when she let me hit. I done ran me up some dog shit since last year. Stuffed the bitch with so many pills, she need a pass smear. Ain't too many houses in my hood, but the crack here. The walkie straight, but I perk with a finger in the ass near.
Off a perk, I beat her back in. She let me bring them PLRs, you know how I'm fucking with. Oh shit, dog shit, got a big bag. Be around no broke shit, I ain't with that. Out of town looking for the bag, I go and get it. Half a pint in my 2, that's how I'm fucking with. Oh shit, dog shit, got a big bag. Can't be around no broke shit, I ain't with that. Can't be around no broke shit, I ain't with that. I'm trying to run my bands up so I can kick back. Yeah, capital P, bitch, I'm a big Mac. And still pop a nigga top like a 6-pack. I'll pop the perk and knock the dust off that little pussy. And these niggas acting hard, but I know they pussy. I get money by the ton, nigga, Steve-O. This broke ass nigga think he Debo. Bitch, I on the city floor. They know we blowing up, smoking big cookie packs, got the bitch throwing up. 1500 on my feet when I step in. Riding with a weapon, call that bitch Stefan. It'll do a nigga dirty. Pocket full of blue strips, you know the money dirty. Bitch, I'm always talking money, that's that ATM. And I'm balling on these niggas, but I don't do the gym. Off a perk, I beat a back, yeah, she let me too. Bring them PLR, cause you know how I'm fucking with. Oh shit, dog shit, got a big bag. Be around no broke shit, I ain't with that. Out of town looking for the bag, I go and get it. Half a pint in my tube, that's how I'm fucking with. Oh shit, dog shit, got a big bag. Can't be around no broke shit, I ain't with that.
DJ Unknown.
Oh shit.
Motherfucking dirty.
Yeah, ghetto boy shit. Man, what up, ID? What's on my mind is a motherfucking murder. What I'm sipping is a muddy cup of motherfucking purple. Was finna hit her with no man, but she fertile. This is 2021, a half a breakfast off is 30. I just took another perky, they ain't worth it. Plug woke me up with 10 birds early, they was perfect. I don't drink liquor, he saw me with a cup, then it was syrup. Pop a nigga, fuck his whole weekend up. It was Thursday. I ain't gonna lie, when I met Peasy, I was dirty. Now I'm with it. I wake up and put that shit on every morning. Told her to get sloppy with the top, it was boring. I just walked in truth with 10 racks, not storming. I don't really measure drink no more. I just poured, slid on the ops out of 2020, it was foreign. And we wasn't trying to be low key, it was orange. Just one for the team, fuck the fat bitch, I was horny. What's on my mind is $1 million stash. What's on my mind is a demon with 220 on the dash. What's on my mind is a bitch like Stacey Dash. What's on my mind is a pint of ice tech, it was glass. What's on my mind is a homicide. What's on my mind is what kind of car I drive when it's time to ride. We finna slide on them niggas, so we driving slow. 223 open up his hand, what's on your mind, bro?
What's on my mind is this motherfucking Glock 40. Attach the switch to the back key, they like to ride foot. What's on my mind is the bitch trying to play me stupid. Dishing off the rock while a nigga banging Jay-Z music. What's on my mind is when them niggas try to pop me up. They let off one, I shot 5 back, almost drop me something. What's on my mind is that a nigga almost hung for real. They say the wrong thing around my hump, that nigga not on the kill. What's on my mind is putting on for the hang one out. Investing money in the right places, now I can't go broke. Real say the phrase, you ain't your daddy, then you ain't gon' broke as fuck. We see flaws in the bitch, girl, I hate your dog. She gave me consent to hit her raw, but I raped her son.
I ain't gonna lie, this bitch pussy good, I'm finna break her phone. Hit the cocaine with some shit that'll break her nose. First bed broke with 6 ones trying to break the phone. Sad cause he got a couple dollars, you know, he do HID, but I'm drinking, walk straight, I don't play with my nose. I just told you what the fuck on my mind. 3 rollies on, still running out of time. 100 shot Glock, we got money, you see the shine. Grab a Glock, then I shot a jumper from the line.
Blood strong, I can cut a whole onion with a dime. No cap, I seen Rio drop 100 out of 9. I got hands, so you kept me with no gun, I'll be fine. The first chain I gotta catch from Golden Sun, let her shine. What's on my mind, shit, I'm thinking about dropping me a nigga. Emerald cut diamonds came from Waffy, it's official. I love my bitch, just hate when she lie to me a little. Just pick a beat, cause me and Rio body instrumentals. No, what's on your mind though? 700 horses in this bitch, but I'ma drive slow. Fuck you trying to get something off his chest, now it's mine, yo. Alright, I'ma let you fuck the bitch, but she mine though. Peanut butter jelly in my wood, you smoke pine cone. I just rolled up 7 woods for the drive home.
What's on my mind is $1 million stash. What's on my mind is a demon with 220 on the dash. What's on my mind is a bitch like Stacey Dash. What's on my mind is a pint of ice tech, it was glass. What's on my mind is a homicide. What's on my mind is what kind of car I drive when it's time to ride. We finna slide on them niggas, so we driving slow. 223 open up his hand, what's on your mind, bro?
Where is she? Look, it may take a while. Wanna wait? There's a bench over there. I'll be back.
Straight. Had freeze, put you in the oven like a cheesecake. I remember buying brand new day.
the mic. Okay, I'm just asking. Early grew up on the beat, now I feel embarrassed. He ain't gonna take me to the crib cause I ain't impaired. Perk 30 got me turned up, I can fight a beer. My white bitch drunk cause in her head I think lights in there. Plus she stay in the Reese's, I know mice in there. Greedy nigga eat all in your face, I don't like to share. Crib filled with backwood hills, you know Mike was there.
Yeah, niggas real the young OG, man. Ghetto boy shit, you know what the fuck going on. Flint shit, man. Hey, you niggas so lame. I could run a book 20 up on cocaine, shooting up a crib, nigga. I don't play the ball games. They gave me diamonds in my watch, I don't want it plain. Niggas fucking out they neck, but they don't want beef. 700 cc's of work, I'm out the whole deep. I wish a nigga would disrespect the last month. I don't cut a check big enough to buy a whole key. I stand tall in any hood, cause I'm a ghetto boy. My feet strong as fuck, cause I be hitting my work with steroids. Soon as I touch down in the past, I need an Android. Shot the Glock for 13 minutes straight, had my hands sore. I could motherfucker quarter, I'm a real hustler. I can't make none of her, she just a pill suffer. Brody got hit with a 3-8, say he ain't feel nothing. Stop yelling in them songs about the ops if you ain't kill nothing. Change his mindset with this 4-5, that's psychology. I got some shit that'll take a nigga head off from down the street. I can get a nigga boo for it. I ain't got no feelings, I leave a nigga stiff and go out to eat.
Go crazy, AD. Let's do it. Long live the guy. You ain't heard about more money, go ask around, ain't know what's up with me. I'll get on that road for a little paper if it come correct. 12 on my buckle for a little minute, but I ain't bustin' sweat. My little hoes on point, I ain't got to say she already hit the text. She just want my time, ain't got no time, so I stay busy. Niggas hoes posing with they pics, but they be real silly. Phone off is 30, just on skin, this shit be busy. Life a bitch that bottle don't get ugly, but that's not pretty. SBA be showing me too much love, I'm finna touch the city. But the curve is 50-50, hit the line, just get up with me. Ones I love the most get put in ink, I gotta keep them in me. Thinking about my son that's on the way when I be living risky. Look, who slashes need a lookout. When he pop out, pop up on him, check his temp. I got more for them 300s, but I believe that double M. She let me fuck this bitch, I'm him. Talking shit, I feel like Tim. Take a risk, it might pay off. Fuck the stylist, I got sauce. I know you fucked up out that last pack, cause you couldn't get it off. Club, I play my song, so you know this shit cold. 3 years in, I'm warming up, I still got hot shit in that phone. Still got hot shit in that. Moment in silence, fall in peace. Train make it home, I know he gone, but he gon' live through me. Kids be tapping phones, so when we speak on shit, we spit the street. Park the car, recline the seat, I can't forget her easily. See you sticking that phone in too often, I don't fuck with your kind. Bottom line, if you steady broke, then you ain't out here trying. I'ma wipe me off, ain't no sugar coating, I'ma give it raw. They ain't taking tears, then he went to sleep and got his skin crossed. Why your BM and my DM sending pics without a bro? I just hit the key, I clear my mood and hit my money walk. Niggas hoes, it ain't my fault. He a tell, I know he soft. Long as they keep shopping, I got options, I'm gonna get it off.
Sometimes the ugliest things have the most ordinary names. Collateral damage, enhanced interrogations. When you're scanning the news, these words barely even register. They're just words. But then you stop and you think about what they really mean. A 7-year-old girl murdered on her way home from school. A naked man alone drowning in the darkness. Gives you a bit of a different perspective. Here's another one for you. The Code of Silence. If you're wondering what I mean by the Code of Silence, here's the Cliff Notes version. It's when you witness something that you know is wrong, but you say nothing. I first encountered the Code of Silence as a recruit in the police academy, but you can find it everywhere. You hear your neighbor beating their kid, but you don't want to get involved. You witness your boss stealing money from the company, and you don't say a word. Because powerful people will punish you if you do. That is the code of silence. Now I'm going to say something a little controversial about the code of silence. And that is, I get it, really I do. Humans have a natural instinct to protect their own. That sense of camaraderie, it's one of the things I loved most about being a cop. We were all on the same team. But here's a question for you. What do you do when someone on your team messes up? Do you hold them accountable? Do you help them get better? Or do you remain silent and allow them to continue to abuse the trust and authority they have been given? I never thought I'd have to make that call. To be honest with you, I could never imagine myself in that kind of situation. But then, I joined the Chicago Police Department. As you may have heard, the south side of Chicago is one of the toughest parts of the city. It is also home to some of the poorest people in the entire nation. Most people would not choose to live in the housing projects here if they had any other options. Gangs run the streets, and the streets are filled with drug dealers selling everything from heroin to crack to cocaine. Tragically, the sound of gunfire and violent crimes were just a part of everyone's daily lives here. This is what I was thrown into as a rookie cop. I'll admit it was a little overwhelming at first, but I learned a lot from my fellow officers who had been on the street for years. They were doing their very best to make this little corner of the world better for everyone that lived here. No needles on the playground, no muggers in the stairwell. All of the things that most of us here take completely for granted. I was proud to be part of that. I talked to people. I got to know their stories and got to know them. I became the person and the officer deserving of their trust. The longer I spent on the job, though, the more I began to hear whispers about some of my fellow officers. I began to hear things that I did not want to believe. A man told me a story that I could not ignore. He had dates, times, names, everything. By this time, I had been on the job for over 14 years, and I could tell a lie from the truth. And this man, he was not lying. He said that a group of my fellow officers were running the projects like a private mafia kingdom, that these officers were shaking down drug dealers for protection money and falsely arresting all of the people who refused to pay. Hundreds of innocent people went to prison for crimes they never committed. And if you can honestly believe this, they may have been the lucky ones. Others were beaten, robbed, and some of them, maybe, just maybe, were even murdered. For well over a decade, a group of rogue officers, some now promoted to bosses, had been allowed to operate with impunity without fear of prosecution, protected by the code of silence. Why hadn't anyone spoken out? Well, it goes back to what every new recruit is taught in the police academy. Never ever go against a fellow officer. Regardless of what you know to be the truth, once an officer writes that report, whatever they put on that page, well, that becomes the truth. The whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I couldn't accept that. I just couldn't. You see, I was raised by my grandmother, and she taught me to speak out against injustice wherever I found it, and that included the police department. She told me it was the right thing to do, and when you do what's right, things will always work out in the end. But boy, was I in for a shock when I told my supervisors about the abuse and criminal conduct happening under their command. No one wanted to listen. Not one single boss said, "Wow, Shannon, we have got to put an end to this." No. Instead, I was told to forget it, to ignore the evidence that I discovered, and for my own good, keep my mouth shut. I tried going to other departments, looking for anyone that would listen to me. I never found them. What I found is the code of silence was everywhere, and it was extremely powerful, preventing the truth from being heard, especially by the public. Eventually, I had to go all the way to the FBI for help. I became a whistleblower, leading an investigation that soon encompassed the very highest ranks of the Chicago Police Department. As you might imagine, this made me very, very unpopular. The bosses ordered my fellow officers not to work with me, not to back me up on the street, even if my life depended on it. My bosses made threats against me. One told me, "I'd hate to tell your daughter you're coming home in a box," referring to the grave danger I was in. The retaliation from inside my own department was so severe, I did not even feel human anymore. I was banned from the lockers, from the shower, and even denied access to the police bathrooms. A boss told me once, and I quote, that I could piss outside with the rest of the rats. Can you imagine that? The second I broke the code of silence, my life was changed forever. Maybe you're wondering, what does that mean? My life was changed forever. Well, here's the quick version. It meant that I lost most of my friends because most of my friends were officers. They didn't just stop talking to me, though. They actively hated my guts. It wasn't just my personal life that changed either. Eventually, I was forced out of a job that I absolutely loved, one that I earned and was really good at. The bosses made it very, very clear that I was all alone, unprotected, in this huge, violent world of criminals as an undercover cop. And if anything happened to me, oh well, I probably deserved it. For all of you sitting here today, that probably sounds a little extreme, and I hope it does, because it was extreme. But you have to remember, to my fellow officers, I had just committed the worst sin a cop can ever commit. I had violated the Brotherhood of Blue. The second I went to an outside department to report internal corruption, I was immediately an outcast. I had crossed the thin blue line. I was now the enemy. But you know what? Despite all of that, I did not give up. I did not take the path of least resistance. For me, there was no choice. I knew that if I did not continue to speak out, there would never be justice for hundreds and hundreds of victims. Another thing, whistleblowers lose everything. And I don't think that's right. All of us here today, we know how precious the truth is. We should do absolutely everything in our power to protect it and to protect and defend those who are brave enough to tell it. It took me years to expose the code of silence. But in 2016, the mayor of Chicago himself was forced to admit that the Chicago Police Department does have a code of silence that allows officers to commit and cover up illegal acts and wrongdoings committed by their own. This is something that the people of the South Side housing projects of Chicago had known their entire lives. That a gang of corrupt officers had abused their authority, and the police department, despite receiving hundreds of complaints, did absolutely nothing to stop them. Finally, the silence had been broken. But that's not where this story ends. There are still hundreds of innocent people suffering behind bars because of the code of silence. That is why today I am working with a pro bono legal clinic called the Exoneration Project. Together, we are trying to help everyone who has been wrongfully convicted by the code of silence get their lives back. I believe they deserve to get their lives back. They deserve to be free. Here's another thing I believe. I am not a hero. I'm not. I am just one ordinary person who refused to look the other way. Was I scared to death? Did I have doubts? Absolutely every single day. But even when my entire world was crashing down around me, I knew I was doing the right thing. And that gave me strength. It gave me courage. If you are ever face to face with a code of silence in your life, I really hope you remember my story. I hope you remember that you, one single ordinary person, can do enormous amounts of good in this world. One right decision, then another, and another by each and every one of us can lead to real change. All of us here, we know how precious the truth is. We must do everything we can to protect it and to protect those who are brave enough to tell it. For whistleblowers like me, we lose things we can never get back. Our career, our friends, family, and maybe even our lives. That has to change. It has to change at the beginning. If we want better officers, we need better training. And that starts day one in the police academy. We must train our officers the importance of reporting the truth. Not because they might get caught lying on camera, no. But because that is the very basic quality necessary to become a cop in the first place. Honesty. We must train our officers that reporting corruption by law enforcement is not their job. And that officers entrusted with the authority to serve and protect our communities will be held responsible. We must give officers a safe environment once they're cops to report the internal corruption. No officer should ever have to walk in my shoes. No officer should ever become the next Shannon Spalding. An officer should never have to choose between doing the right thing, which is his job, or losing his job, his family, and maybe even his life. We must have the unions protect all of its officers. They must provide whistleblower protection for each and every cop. Because right now, whistleblowers, they're not protected. Not by their union and not by their contract. And that has to change. Repairing the damage done by the code of silence, I'm not going to lie, it is not going to be easy, but it is absolutely achievable. We all know what we have to do. We have to back up our words with actions. We have to become involved. Where do we start? Well, by what we're doing right now. First, all of us, we get together. And then, together, all of us, we get to work. Thank you.
I only got 15 seconds to sing. Boy, am I glad it ain't up to you. Let's see what God got to say about it. Let's go. They say I only got 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, and watch what I do with it. I'ma get it poppin' till 15 seconds of fame. Give me my 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, now watch what I do with it. I'ma show you it only takes 15 seconds to. It only takes 15 seconds in the bed for a sperm cell get to swimming till it hit an egg. 9 weeks later, she laying in a different bed like it's a him and she granny kissing on the end of his head. It only takes 15 seconds to end up dead, cause I told you don't go to that party, but you went instead. Or cause you was too big to ignore what some niggas said. Less than 15 between slipping and hitting your head. In 15 seconds, your future can become your past. You can put the weed down and make this next shit your last. Put the drink down and this will be the last sip you had. Or look up in 15 years and it's still in your hand. 15 seconds ago, you hated. When all 15 balls, now I'm the greatest. 15 seconds to becoming your favorite. Now I ain't going nowhere, sucker, I'm here to stay. They say I only got 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, then watch what I do with it. I'ma get it poppin' till 15 seconds of fame. Give me my 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame.
I do with it. I'ma show you it only takes 15 seconds to. It only took 15 seconds to call the cops when you saw that boy getting beat up on the block. You took 15 minutes to sit there and watch the punch thrown in the 14th is when his heart stopped. The first 15 seconds of an interview, a potential employee already knows if he's into you. A girl already knows what kind of play and time of day she giving you, whether or not she feeling you. It only takes 15 seconds to contract days, go through life feeling like you living your last days. Only takes 15 seconds to pray and have faith before the doctor say cancer is passé. 15 seconds ago you hated, when all 15 bars, now I'm the greatest. 15 seconds from becoming your favorite. Now I ain't going nowhere, sucker, I'm here to stay. They say I only got 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, then watch what I do with it. I'ma hit it up and just 15 seconds of fame. Give me my 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, now watch what I do with it. I'ma show you it only takes 15 seconds to. See, they say I got 15 seconds of fame, like it ain't a lot of things. 15 seconds of change, 15 seconds of effort to get you closer to better than never will on the effortless quest for the same. 15 seconds from now you can look up, your family disappeared but you still here shook up. Bible in your house but you never picked the book up. You stayed in your mess and just ain't get took up. It only takes 15 seconds to accept Christ or embrace the dark side and reject light. But just remember that 15 seconds on earth can determine where you gon' spend your forever at. 15 seconds ago you hated, when all 15 bars, now I'm the greatest. 15 seconds from becoming your favorite. Now I ain't going nowhere, sucker, I'm here to stay. They say I only got 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, then watch what I do with it. I'ma hit it up and just 15 seconds of fame. Give me my 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, now watch what I do with it. I'ma show you it only takes 15 seconds to change. Blogger say I only got 15 seconds of fame. Boy, am I glad it ain't up to you. Let's see what God gotta say about it. Let's go. They say I only got 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, then watch what I do with it. I'ma hit it up and just 15 seconds of fame. Give me my 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, now watch what I do with it. I'ma show you it only takes 15 seconds to. It only takes 15 seconds in the bed for a sperm cell get to swimming till it hit an egg. 9 months later she laying in a different bed like it's a him and she grinning kissing on the infant's head. It only takes 15 seconds to end up dead, cause I told you don't go to that party but you went instead. Or cause you was too big to ignore what some niggas said. Less than 15 between slipping and hitting your head. In 15 seconds your future can become your past. You can put the weed down, make this next hit your last. Put the drink down and this will be the last sip you had. Or look up in 15 years and it's still in your hand. 15 seconds ago you hated, when all 15 bars, now I'm the greatest. 15 seconds from becoming your favorite. Now I ain't going nowhere, sucker, I'm here to stay. They say I only got 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, then watch what I do with it. I'ma hit it up and just 15 seconds of fame. Give me my 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, now watch what I do with it. I'ma show you it only takes 15 seconds to. It only took 15 seconds to call the cops when you saw that boy getting beat up on the block. You took 15 minutes to sit sit there and watching the punch thrown in the 14th is when his heart stopped. The first 15 seconds of an interview, a potential employer already knows if he's into you. A girl already knows what kind of play and time of day she giving you, whether or not she feeling you. It only takes 15 seconds to contract days and go through life feeling like you living your last days. Only takes 15 seconds to pray and have faith before the doctors say your cancer is passe. 15 seconds ago you made it, went home 15 balls, now I'm the greatest. 15 seconds from becoming your favorite, now I ain't going nowhere, sucker, I'm here to stay. They say I only got 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, then watch what I do with it, I make it if I went to 15 seconds of fame. Give me my 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, now watch what I do with it, I'ma show you it only takes 15 seconds to. See, they say I got 15 seconds of fame, like it ain't a lot of things, 15 seconds of change. 15 seconds of effort to get you close to the better than never will on the effortless quest for the same. 15 seconds from now you can look up, your family disappeared but you still here shook up. Bible in your house but you never picked the book up. You stayed in your mess and just ain't get took up. It only takes 15 seconds to accept Christ or embrace the dark side and reject light. But just remember that 15 seconds on earth can determine where you gon' spend your forever at. 15 seconds ago you hated, went home 15 balls, now I'm the greatest. 15 seconds from becoming your favorite, now I ain't going nowhere, sucker, I'm here to stay. They say I only got 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, then watch what I do with it, I make it if I went to 15 seconds of fame. Give me my 15 seconds, just 15 seconds, just 15 seconds of fame. Okay, now watch what I do with it, I'ma show you it only takes 15 seconds to change. Proclaiming the name of the king who reigns in the greatest fashion. Open your Bible to read and you'll see it ain't a chapter in it with a verse that is not serving your favorite rapper. No beta kappa, only the alpha omega matters. We'll never cave in, if shit happen, it's grace to catch us. We celebrate them and if we have to, we aiming at you. When the game's on, we get blamed on, we play with matches. My whole team on that word tip. You would think we were some Marines, how we worship. This true religion, we bleed for the orphans and widows. If you hungry, then we feed you according to scripture. You don't know PT smothered in his love. This cannon to leave a whole team covered in the blood. I did my thing different, now everybody get credit. But homie, this the gospel, anybody can get it. Anybody can get it, listening while I spit it. K-Bob's flow is supposed to go after biz. Gotta be getting, I'm trying to show these officers how important the Lord is. My Senate wrote me a check that I couldn't cash or afford it. Until I got involved. He just can't receive your pain relieving like he's Tylenol. I needed his grace, sipping on my sins till it blew up in my face. Like I went up to the bar and ordered cocktail, Molotov. Living life with the one that your favorite rapper mocks. But you don't see it like criminals holding hands with cops. I'm on another planet, this man is an astronaut wanting that living water. Ain't waiting for Satan's hand to pop. Purified, be done with spiritual carbonation. Similar hard to Davis, I'm not to my father's races. We know when godly stations be making unlawful statements, but we got our father, so we just reppin' the modern nation. Still, I'm just laid back, chillin' with the rest of the team. Ready to slay wax and to tell them bye-bye. Compete with the brainjack ripper in the Ragnador dragon with his 8 legs. Till I kill his eyesight. Still a venomous enemy. I just had to my defender, he forever replenish me. Doesn't matter if the weather's November in Tennessee. Always hotter than the sun in the summer on Venice Beach, California. West side for me, stay loud in Kona. We hottest owners of the block when them coppers patrolling. Take a habanero, lots of cola, throw lava on impossible. You get the slightest ideas, how it going. Life on the line for Yeshua the Messiah. I ain't not bad down, you can put me in the fire. Lucifer is a liar, seduce to him is minutes, only time will tell, like the clock snitching. Still reppin' that YO, died over that money for me, Christ gave me that fire, yo. Enemies that be running from me, God made me that fly, yo. So do whatever you pay 5% all day, my yo. Prince of the word, what I'm moving now. To show my life and cash money is for juveniles. And Christ covered my life with his love. Instead of be holding it over my head like a grudge. That dog had to flee when the light hit. Underhanded left when that overhand right hit. Can't see my sight. Move on the fly drunk like a Denzel flight.